the more we have talked about and learned about what real faith is and how much we need to trust in God, I can totally understand now why Jesus kept saying to disciples, you got nothing. You don't even have faith the size of a mustard seed. I understand that. And I believe me, I am not any better than a disciple believe me, I'm not even close to a disciple. If they got the faith the size of a mustard seed, I may be a grain of sand. But we got a long ways to go. And I think that, and we have, many of us have spoken about this of late in the last year or something, that it really seems like God is accelerating the timetable of building our faith. You know what I'm saying? It's like it seemed like for a long time, things were just kind of going along, and we'd have a little test or a little trial or a little tribulation here and there, and we were growing, but we were growing slow. But now it seems like, I don't want to ascribe the word urgent to God, because God doesn't do anything urgent, I don't think. I mean, it's all working out according to his plan. But I think part of his plan is apparently, I need to mature my people a little quicker because they're going to need it.
We need some miracle grow is what's happening.
We need some miracle grow. And I think that's what some of us have begun experiencing, is God's miracle grow. Is okay, guys. We need to step up the pace of learning here, which can be a little disconcerting. Can it not be a little disconcerting? It can. It is. We don't like being tested and poked and prodded and having the rough edges, shaved off. That's not comfortable. But it is absolutely necessary, and we need to have faith that he knows exactly what he's doing, and for whatever reason, he needs to accelerate our growth. Which,
I heard that this week.
Did you?
Listened to something, and they said our churches better wake up, because it is a mess.
There's a growing sense of urgency out there.
Yeah.
And that's, you know what, that should fill our hearts with anticipation,
You don't play around anymore. You get
Right. We need to take things seriously.
very serious.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
People going to hell right around us, and we have to be open to their spirit to minister to them.
Well, I'm glad that has been a discussion here, for what's going on in the world and how we interact with people around us, because that's what our section here is about today. In Genesis chapter 19, it's right there. This is what we're talking about. It's Lot and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So let's take a look at this. I want to start this little bit of chapter 19 by talking about Lot. We're going to do some discussion about Lot as a righteous man who is interacting with a godless society. And we're going to go to 2 Peter. I've got it up on the screen, and I've even got it slightly larger. Isn't that delightful?
Yes, thank you.
Angela was kicking me a little bit, saying, man, you got to put some bigger text on that screen. So I'm going to, I'll just read it to you, but we're in 2 Peter 2, 4 through 9. Can you actually see that, Jerry?
Yeah.
It's not too bad.
That's
Huh?
clear as can be.
Good. Okay, so 2 Peter 2, verses 4 through 9 says, for if God did not spare the messengers who sinned, or the angels who sinned, but sent them to Tartarus, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be kept for judgment, and did not spare the world of old, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others, bringing in the flood on the world of the wicked, and having reduced to ashes the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, condemned them to destruction, having made them an example to those who afterwards would live wickedly, and rescued righteous Lot, who was oppressed with the indecent behavior of the lawless. For day after day that righteous man, dwelling among them, tortured his righteous soul by seeing and hearing their lawless works. Then God knows how to rescue the reverent ones from trial, and to keep the unrighteous unto the day of judgment. Now, we've talked about this passage before, and been slightly puzzled by it, how Peter refers to Lot as a righteous person. Because we've studied Lot and seen him throughout the last several chapters in our studies, and we have had a little bit of difficulty seeing Lot as a righteous person. And in fact, he seems to even ascribe here, describe Noah as being a preacher of righteousness. I mean, we remember the story of Noah. Did he preach? Did he do some preaching?
I thought he preached for that 120 years he was building He was building the ark.
And he said, yeah.
According to the Torah text itself, it didn't say anything. He
Maybe
didn't
I
say
just heard it
nothing. He
somewhere,
wasn't.
I
There's
don't
no indication in the text that Noah spoke to anybody or interacted with anybody around him. He got a message from God. I'm about to bring this flood on the world. Need you to build this ark. He did the work. The rain started. We have no interaction with him, with anybody around him.
We also discussed, though, about, true preaching is not always with words.
Yes, we have mentioned that many times, and I got it.
There had
Yeah,
to be a lot of people who said, "What in the world are you doing?" And he told them what God had told him to do.
Yeah.
That is
True.
foretelling what God told him.
absolutely. But we don't have any record of that in the Torah itself. Now, if you watch the movie Noah, which I did, and of course people just thought that it was a little weird, but you know what? I kind of liked it. It was interesting. It had a weird couple of twists that I wasn't delighted with, but it was okay. Yes, in the tradition of the writings of the Jews, yes, Noah was a preacher of righteousness. They have some extra biblical ideas that Noah preached righteousness, and they actually will talk about Lot as a righteous individual, based upon teachings that he must have received from Abraham or something. But we don't have any real record of righteousness on behalf of Noah, or do we? I want to discuss that with you a little bit today, and maybe look at this text and see, do we have any demonstrations of righteousness, on Lot's behalf? So just with that in mind, I will then go to, sorry, this has gotten smaller.
That's right.
Come on, you're doing so well.
I know, I'm sorry. Oh, so sorry. Yeah, if I made it big, I'd have to keep scrolling through screens. And you all have your own Bibles. Get over it.
But you're not reading the same words we're reading.
No, I'm not. I'm sorry. My text is a little different.
When are you getting your 85-inch?
The lines are too close.
I know. I need a big TV to fill up this whole area. That'd be kind of neat,
I
huh?
can read the words, but
So now we move to Genesis chapter 19, and I will start at the beginning. So last time we were in 18, God had appeared to Abraham in the form of these three men, angels and God, however you want to mix that up, and told him, Sarah's going to have a son, and I'm come down also to see what's going on with Sodom and Gomorrah. And then he argues with him about how many people might be righteous there, if you all remember that. So then the two messengers, verse 1, came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. And when Lot saw them, he rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground, and he said, "Behold, please, my masters, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet, and rise early and go your way." And they said, "No, but let us spend the night in the open square." But he urged them strongly, and they turned into him, and came into his house. And he made them a feast, and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. And before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people from every part, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us and let us know them." So Lot went out to them through the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, "Please, my brothers, do not do evil. Look, please, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Please, let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you wish. Only do no deed to these men, because they have come under the shadow of my roof." But they said, "Come further." And they said, "This one came in to sojourn among us, and should he always judge, or is he going to judge us as well? Now we are going to treat you worse than them." And so they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, and they wearied themselves to find the door. And the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, a son-in-law, or your sons and your daughters, and whomever else you might have in the city? Bring them out of this place, for we are going to destroy this place, because the cry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." And Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters, and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord is going to destroy this city." but to his sons-in-law he seemed to be as one joking. And when morning dawned, the messengers urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." And while he loitered, the men took hold of his hand and his wife's hand and the hands of his 2 daughters, the Lord having compassion on him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. 17 through 38. And it came to be, when they had brought them outside, that he said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest you be consumed." And Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lord. Behold, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have increased your loving commitment, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I am unable to escape to the mountain, lest calamity overtake me and I die. Behold, please, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is small. Please let me escape there. Is it not a small matter? And let my life be saved?" And he said to him, "Behold, I have favored you concerning this matter also, without overthrowing this city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I am not able to do any deed until you arrive there." So the name of the city was called Zor, because it's small. The sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zor, and the Lord rained sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. He overthrew those cities and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a post or a pillar of salt. And Abraham rose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain. And he looked and saw the smoke of the land, which went up like the smoke of a furnace. Thus it came to be, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. And Lot went up out of Zor and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zor. And he and his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. And the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come into us, as is the way of all of the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine and lie with him, so that we be preserving the seed of our father." And so they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he was not aware of it, when she lay down or when she arose. And it came to be on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, "Behold, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight as well, and you go in and lie with him, so that we keep the seed of our father." And so they made their father drink wine that night as well. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he was not aware of when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. And the firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the children of Ammon to this day. Yes, indeed.
They're so stupid, they didn't even trust God for. They were so afraid they didn't even trust God that He's going to give them a man so they can have children. Instead, they freaked out and went to their daughters.
Well, that's a common insight, and I think that we will take a look at this and see if maybe there might be a little bit more information here.
And then Zor was a terrible place, just like Sodom and Gomorrah.
It was,
He would have
yeah.
listened to what the Lord said to the angel said, "Let's get out of the city and go to the mountains." But they were dumb
Right.
and went to a city near that
Right.
was like Sodom and Gomorrah, when they don't know what God had for them in the mountain.
True. Very true.
At their faces.
Very true indeed. So, back to the first half of this chapter, I want to start back at the beginning of this chapter about the when the men first came to him, and discuss a little bit about what it means when it says that these messengers came to him and he was sitting in the gate of Sodom, sitting at the gate or something.
He was one of the leaders in the city.
One of the
He was
elders,
well
one of the-
respected.
That is a common That's a common understanding from the Bible, is that the city's transactions, the city council, the judges of the city, things that are happening on a legal capacity were happening at the city gate. That's not like they had a city hall inside the city. The leaders and the elders of the place would generally congregate at the gate of the city in order to conduct legal matters and to seek justice and such like that.
A lot of times they had rooms and big places inside the gate, inside the walls of the city,
Yeah.
right by the gate. Where you had,
Right.
if they wanted a place
Sure. Yeah.
for a courtroom or whatever, conference room.
So yeah, Gracie and Jerry are correct that most traditional interpretations will suggest that Lot had become a leader, some type of a ruler, city council member maybe, or something like that among the Sodomites. Now, how does that jive, so to speak, with the fact that when these guys come and try to bust into his house, that he says, this guy came to live among us as a sojourner and now he's going to judge? Does those two things seem to go together? I mean, if he is a judge and he's sitting at the city gate, then yeah.
He wasn't challenging them while he was sitting in the gates. They were happy with him, but
think
when he
that
starts
word is-
standing up to them,
Shaphat,
Mhm.
right, which is like lawgiver.
Yeah.
So perhaps he was laying down some of God's words while he was there.
Could be. I'm just saying, why does it seem to suggest in the text that he is a leader among the city and a judge of it of some kind, but then when the men surround his house, they say, what are you, a judge? Well, yeah, haven't you seen me sitting outside of the city gate? So something doesn't seem to connect.
Is that really, are they questioning whether he is? Or
That's what I'm wondering. Are they questioning whether he's a judge, or are they...
Maybe because, like today, if you've got a lot of money,
Hmm.
you're rich, which he was,
Sure.
you move into town, people, maybe he bought his position, and maybe they said, well, you're rich, we'll just elevate you to this position.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Sure. That's possible. Angela?
I heard somewhere that the major problem with, one of the problems that God had with Sodom was the lack of justice.
Oh, yeah.
So he could have been a judge as long as he was judging the way everybody wanted him to. But when he said something that was condemning to them, just like things are getting today, where there's a certain tack you have to take, and if you say anything against that's not PC, you are immediately condemned.
True.
And if you are somebody who was supposed to be making laws.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good insight. Some have actually suggested, as an alternate theory regarding these first section here, that Lot was not at this city of the city gate as a judge, but one who was seeking justice.
And Alan, we spoke last week about, in the gate, getting out of the gate or getting out of your tents. Sometimes it can also maybe mean, that you see something of spiritual nature. Because there were two angels, and sometimes it refers to men, sometimes to angels, and that's also weird. How does he know right away when they're coming towards him? He bows down. Okay, they're not ordinary men. There must be something to it.
That is certainly possible as well, yeah. And some have suggested that maybe he was there not as a judge, but as someone who was seeking justice, that he himself had been wronged and he was maybe in court or trying to speak to the city leaders to get justice for himself or on behalf of another. Some have said that he's sitting at the city gates looking just for this type of situation, where some traveler or stranger is coming through in order to ward them off. Don't stop here. This is not a great place to be. Now, I know that we have in the past, when we noted that Lot was heading towards Sodom and Gomorrah, when Abraham said, hey, you go north, I'll go south, you go south, I'll go north, but he went east instead and decided to dwell as far as Sodom, but now we find him living in amongst the people of Sodom, that it is perhaps that he's here trying to ward off people to come. And when we looked at that previous passage, we looked at the book of Ezekiel and some of the other prophets who have spoken in a little bit more detail about the great sin of Sodom, and that it was not homosexuality. That was maybe one of its problems for sure, but it wasn't listed among one of its biggest issues. What were some of the things that we noted in the book of Ezekiel when it talked about Sodom, and it was comparing Sodom to the wickedness of the city of Jerusalem during the time of the prophet? Do you remember what those items were?
Were they worshiping idols?
No, well, not quite.
They were unhospitable. They like to roll up in gangs, from what I understand. Like to pick on people.
Yeah.
Like to beat people up.
Well, actually, you know what? It might be a good idea for us to go ahead and review that real quick. If you look at the text here in this section, and you just do a little word search on Sodom, you can see that one of the references to the text is in Ezekiel 16:49. In Ezekiel 16:49, Ezekiel the prophet gives us a little bit more insight into the problems that God has with the Sodomites. It says, "Behold, this was the crookedness of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter had pride, plenty of food, and lots of free time. And she did not help the poor and the needy, and they were proud and did abominations before me." Remember that? That's kind of interesting, because in most of Western culture, we talk about Sodom as just being rife with homosexuality. And that seems to be, because you look at, bring them out to us so that we can know them. Well, we automatically interpret that in our biblical sense of to know something. Adam knew his wife Eve, and then of course that's involving sexual intimacy.
Well, Lot thought that's what they meant, because he offered him his daughters who were virgins.
That is true. That is true.
And doing abominations before him,
That
is called an abomination
That
in
is.
the Torah.
Yeah,
So it could
that
be-
is called an abomination. But interesting to note that we automatically go to that sin of homosexuality when we're talking about it. And that's where the word sodomy came from, is this situation right here. But it gives us a little bit more insight when we look at the prophets talking about Sodom, that they, the crookedness was that they were proud, they were rich, and had a lot of free time. And we know that's why Lot went there, right? Well watered, they got no problems, no issues. It's a wealthy place. And what they have is no help for the poor and the needy. And have any of you read in the book of Jasher regarding some of the incidents regarding Sodom? That's some interesting, very interesting stuff. Chapter 13 to 15, I believe, in the book of Jasher describes Sodom and what it was like. Some really interesting stories, which really lead you to understand, A, what's being talked about here in the book of Ezekiel, and also maybe why Lot was trying to help his visitors to escape, because they treated foreigners, people who came to the city to visit, very, very badly. They had stories of, for example, a traveler would come along and he's on a long journey in Sodom, he's got to stay there, and he visits this person, and the person is like, "Oh yeah, come on in," but he had a plan. The guy had some wealthy possessions, a really nice robe of many colors and some, braided rich fabrics, and he says, I'll hold those for you and put them away for you in storage, stay with me and have a drink. He got him drunk, and he's like, "Oh, don't leave, stay another night." So he stays another night, and then of course the guy says, "Okay, I got to get out of here." And he's like, "Okay." It's like, "Let me have my stuff." It's like, "What stuff?"
Yeah.
"Oh, my fancy coat of many colors and the braided fabric." And he's like, "Oh, you had a dream about a fancy coat and a braided fabric? Well, I interpret dreams too. Let me tell you what your dream means," which is very curious. And then he gives him some cockamamie story about what his dream means. "You dreamt that you had this stuff." And then he's like, "I charge for my services of interpreting dreams." So you owe me $3. And the guy's like, no, wait. I need the stuff that I gave you to hold me for me so I can leave. He's like, I told you, I interpreted your dream. So they end up going to court. And the judge says, the guy interpreted your dream, pay him his money. And the guy got kicked out of town, run around out of town on a rail, and ended up having to pay the guy who stole from him. There was another story about Eliezer. It says that Abraham's wife Sarah sent Eliezer to Sodom in order to check up on Lot, see how Lot was doing. And he ran into a guy who was, mistreating a traveler. And Eliezer got involved and said, "Hey, what are you doing to this guy?" And the dude hit him in the head with a rock, hit Eliezer in the head with a rock for interfering. And he began to bleed from his head. And the guy said, "I'm a bloodletter. You owe me money." ridiculous stuff. And so Eliezer was like, "I ain't paying you nothing." It's like, "You owe me. I'm a doctor. I just let some blood for you. You're going to be better now. You owe me $5. So they went to court, and the judge said, "This guy's a well-known bloodletter. You owe him $5. So Eliezer took a rock and bashed the judge in the head and said, "I too am a bloodletter. Give me my money." So you've got, it also says in that same section of reading in the book of Jasher that Lot had another daughter who exercised compassion on a traveler, and they set her on fire for having compassion on a traveler. And you know what they would do is they would, see a person coming into the city and somebody poor, that happened to be in the town center, begging bread or something. Everybody would come by and flip a gold coin at this beggar. But then they would have a rule that you do not sell them anything. So the poor would have all this money, but they would go to the bread store and they're like, "We can't sell you anything." So they would starve to death with pockets full of gold and silver, and then once they would die, the people who had given them money would go pick their pockets and get their money back. So this place is, it's really justice. There's no justice, and they have no compassion on the poor and the needy, and they are just absolutely wicked to people who are in need.
At this time, does Lot just have these two daughters?
We don't know for sure.
Well, he had some sons-in-law outside those two daughters.
Yeah, but the angels say, do you have any other daughters or sons-in-law? So
It only goes to the son-in-laws.
Right.
But it said they were
Those son-in-laws are
virgins.
not those
That's
two
the
daughters.
two that were still
because
living home.
That's a big question is, wait a minute. If
not
these are the
married,
two daughters that he has, and then it's talking about he went to his sons-in-law, are these the...
virgins,
right?
The
It says
virgins
those-
were the two that were still at home. The son-in-law is married to the daughter who had gotten married, and it wasn't the two that were. So he had at least three.
We don't
daughters.
know.
Well, the text says those taking his daughters. Maybe they were betrothed and had
That's the
not.
common understanding, is that these daughters were betrothed to these men. And of course, in biblical times, you know that once you become betrothed, you are actually technically legally married, but not in an intimate physical sense.
But they would call them sons-in-law. It would have called them their betrothed, not their sons-in-law.
Well, no, legally in these days, once you're betrothed, they are legally married. They just don't cohabit
wait
That
yet.
makes it even worse that he's giving them over.
This is true, but and some have suggested, well, it's because he knows how these men are. Maybe they married his daughters for some type of political privilege, as like an arranged marriage, and they really had no intention of having sex with them. They was just an arranged marriage for political, gamesmanship.
Marriages that they arranged, they would meet together, but they wouldn't get married for a whole year.
Right.
They would wait a whole year.
But they would be betrothed.
Yeah, right.
Angela.
It says right here, and Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters.
Yeah, that's what it
Says that?
Yeah, those taking his
Yeah.
daughters.
Mm-hmm. So it does seem that these sons-in-law that he went to talk with were betrothed to his daughters. And it seems to me that one of the only possible interpretations is that they didn't really have any interest in his daughters. It was a politically arranged marriage, that they were getting some kind of concessions from Lot for marrying his daughters, maybe a dowry.
Why do you come to that conclusion though? What draws you to that? It's
Because he offered his daughters to the crowd to say, I have virgin daughters that have never known a man, let me send them out to you, because well, that seems like a terribly unrighteous thing to do. Unless he knows that they are mad with lust as homosexuals and they have no interest in his daughters, so it doesn't matter if he's offering them his daughters because he knows they're not going to take them.
Is he then really righteous?
That's a great question.
Righteous means right
This
standing
same
with
thing
God.
happens in Judges 19.
It does.
So I mean,
Yes.
there's something about, I don't understand what it is, but there's some kind of unwritten law or something.
This is when they almost killed all the Benjamites because
Right.
the Levitical priest and his concubine that he sent her
And
out.
that's where we kind of get an insight on, when you come into a town, someone of your brethren should be taking you in. I
Right.
think
Right.
that maybe that's what Lot is waiting for, just to make sure everybody's cool, and he sees these men coming. Maybe that's what he's looking for, to take them into his home, because
Right.
no one should be out at night.
Right.
And
I
then-
get that from Judges 19,
Sure.
so I don't know.
Yeah.
And then they had a lot of respect more for them than they did their own family members, and would be very hospitable.
Why does he refer to them as, look, please, my masters, please turn please turn into your servant's house and spend the night, wash your feet, and rise early and go your way. Why does he call them masters? Number one. Number two.
That just means sir,
Okay, I got
Well, it's
that.
Lord, it's Adonai.
That's
which in Hebrew is just sir.
Yeah,
Well, are they the two people that were with the Lord?
So there's some question about whether or not he believes that they are angels at this point.
So wait. But if he does know they're angels, then yeah, you can offer your daughters, but because you know they're not going to take them.
Well, he
There's a
falls
lot
on
of
his
things
feet.
It's a very strange
I
situation
know.
here. What's that?
Yeah, he falls even on his face, so he must
Yeah,
know
like he goes-
it is of divine nature.
Right.
because
It
Yeah,
seems
you would never
so.
fall on your
Well,
face.
then
Because
he
you say
gives them a
that's
feast.
worship, right?
Yeah.
And he baked
When they
them.
fall on their face.
Yeah, it's either that or it's a profound sign of respect.
That's humility too. I mean, Moses and Aaron did that when the sons of Korah came challenging them. They came down and went down to their face too. So it's
That's
also
true.
a sign of humility.
That's true.
But I don't know if we noticed this, but these are paralleled. What at the beginning of Genesis 18, what happened with Abraham? It's almost
Yeah.
verbatim.
Yeah, that's coming up right next.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my next series of questions here is comparing those two. So I would say, as to this thing, if Lot is a leader among these wicked people, is he trying to hold back the tide of wickedness among them, like Peter suggests?
What if he's on the gate on the other side, though? He's locking them in, keeping them in, keeping people out. Like he's not a leader. It's so weird. I've read this.
Maybe he's
passage
trying
many
to
times, and I picture-
protect people who are coming
yeah,
by.
but I always picture the same thing. There's this house, and there's actually a gate, and he's outside the gate. He's outside the gate because they have gates, right?
Sure.
It's a city,
Yeah.
and he's like a guard outside the gate, letting people in. And he knows wickedness in there, and he wants to keep it in there, contained, rather than
Yeah, I
he doesn't
see
want
what you're
people coming
saying.
out that are from there. If he believes these
Yeah.
are good angels or whatever,
Right.
he's trying to help them
Yeah.
to the point he's offering his daughters, but I don't know.
So
Like
this
that's
is-
what
yeah.
spins me out. Well, in the end, when he's with his daughters, I mean, this
There's
is
some
weird.
very weird stuff going on here, which makes it really challenging. But, John?
Also, with regards to that, maybe a little different, but in 3, also the weird language is when he says, and it says in my translation as well, I can barely read it, but he urged them strongly.
He pressed them hard, come in and stay with me, because they wanted to stay in the city town
Yeah,
square.
and it says 2 things. It came into him and into his house.
Hmm.
So is that like also a spiritual thing, or?
That's certainly
What does that
possible.
mean? Because my translation says the same thing, and I thought that was kind of an odd word.
An odd way of putting it, where he
Yeah.
welcomes them, but then also welcomes them into his house.
Yeah.
It could be a spiritual interpretation of the man Lot is open
Yeah.
to opening his heart
Yeah.
to people around him. That could be an indication. Yeah, absolutely. I think, what do you think is slightly ironic is that if he is a judge of this place, what does it say about him being the judge of a place which is about to be destroyed?
You like playing right on the edge of the fence.
He seems to be right on the edge of the fence. He really does. He really does. It's so
He
challenging
didn't
to
seem to tell a lot of people what's going on. It's
Almost
his
selfish.
family.
almost.
But the thing is the reason why I see that he's righteous is because of that whole exchange between Abraham and God. He's saying, would you destroy the city? Basically, it's like, if there's someone righteous, they'll live. And why would he bring him out if he were not righteous? He would be destroyed with that city.
Right.
So I think that there is indication that he is righteous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Abraham's
Yeah, and I think
But it does beg the reason, why is he there?
that's a good point.
Why is he living among the,
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Angela, did you have something?
Well, not only was he living among them, but when they told him to go to the mountains, he's like, no, I can't go to the mountains, I have to go to another city.
It's very. He seems like a very conflicted person.
He's a missionary.
And he didn't voluntarily leave with them, they grabbed him and dragged him and his wife and his daughters out.
Yeah.
So,
Very strange, isn't it?
It's kind of like the seed in the weeds to me, because it's like his wife even, she looked back, and you can't. No one who puts their hand to the plow looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. And I think that's what she's indicating for us there.
Yeah.
And it talks about him being. We read something that sounded like him being stifled by all of these things around him. They got the pride of the rich and all the things that would choke the word. So it's kind of like.
Yeah.
it's like us living with tolerance.
Exactly.
That's a good point. Lou?
Well, you talk about Lot living amongst all these people. Well, what did Jesus? Who did he associate with?
That's a good question.
Associated with those who were willing to let him have the say.
Right.
And they listened to him. He didn't lower his standards
Right.
or.
And I think that we have a habit sometimes of saying Jesus was a friend of sinners.
No,
It doesn't say that.
No, but he lived amongst them.
He did live among them. We all have to live among them.
He purposely made a point to make.
He ministered to them and he associated with them, but friendship was the different thing. I mean, he associated with his disciples pretty much exclusively, but he mingled among the crowd. That's a good insight, because do you think, is Lot one of these people, or is he among these people? That's a good question to ask yourself.
He mingled and was among them.
Okay, but he's not of them. Okay, that much seems clear to me, that he is among them, but he is not one of them. That does seem clear. Right.
Well, they even said that when they said, when they called him a sojourner.
Right. That's a good insight. John?
In a way, he must be a righteous person, because we read it in other portions in the Bible. But I'm still trying to understand what the whole, from a bird's eye view, the whole premises of this story what we read. What does it really want to show us?
Unequal yoke.
I think it shows us that
Because
God is
he's bad
able
and he's not bad.
God is able to save the righteous. So a lesson for you that we may not understand until later, when the whole world is in chaos and falling around us. He is able to bring you out.
It's a good insight. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but I think you're both absolutely right. I want to, just for a moment, since Tracy brought that up, compare and contrast these seeming bookends. I don't know if it's, I didn't find an actual chiasm necessarily with these parallel stories of these same people coming to visit Abraham and how he responds versus these same people coming to visit Lot and how he responds. I didn't find a chiasm necessarily, but I do find, if you want to call it a menorah pattern, some kind of balancing thing that God wants you to compare and contrast these two stories, but not that there's something, necessarily nugget of truth in the middle as a chiastic structure. But, for example, Abraham was in the door of his tent, and Lot was in the gate of the city. Sodom.
Which means burning or burnt.
Or their secret, or something like that. It's a strange translation, but yeah, so there's a good parallel there at the entrance to something. Okay, now you've got Abraham runs to the visitors. Lot stands up and the visitors seem to come to him. Doesn't say he ran towards the visitors. They both bowed to the ground. Tracy?
One has 3 visitors coming and one only has 2 visitors coming.
That's a good insight. What would you make of that?
I don't know, but I think there's something to it.
I do too. I don't know. Angela?
Almost still with Abraham.
The bowing part.
Could be.
My translation, which I don't know, but it says Abraham bowed himself to the earth and Lot bowed his face to the ground. I don't know if that. Let me look.
Interesting.
Why it's not worded the same way.
Okay. It's possible there might be something there. You can see that Abraham offers water, foot washing, rest, and food to the travelers. Lot offers shelter, foot washing, and an exhortation to leave early.
Yeah.
It's a little different.
But he does feed them.
He does feed them.
Abraham offers lechem, right? Bread.
Yes.
And
Lot offers matzos.
He makes some kind of cakes or something.
Yeah. Now this is the first time that the word matzo or matzah is mentioned in the Bible.
Well, Lot made the unleavened bread, or was his wife?
Yeah. That's a good question. We don't know. His wife doesn't seem to have been involved here very much. She's not mentioned. But I think what's kind of interesting is that when a visitor comes, I think that foot washing is traditionally offered as like the first thing you do. You know, hey, here's a drink. Let me wash your feet. Come in, wash the dust off. Lot kind of has that backwards. He kind of puts that afterwards. He's like, hey, let me get you some shelter. Come and stay with me, and then we'll wash your feet. And by the way, get up early and leave. He wants them out of there quickly. And I think that does indicate to me that he is concerned about his guests. This is an act of righteousness, him standing in the gap and trying to stop the people from molesting his visitors. This is an act of righteousness. Yeah. First, in the first instance, he's saying, I'll feed you, I'll give you some shelter, and then, for your own safety, you should get up and get out of here. If it's so unsafe that he wants them to hurry and come to my house, don't be out in the open, and then get up early and get out of here.
Take my daughters if you want.
That he does seem to be protecting them. He does seem to be offering protection. Tracy?
I don't know if you said it, I might have missed, but when they come to Abraham, they're coming during the heat of the day, and that's specific, and they come to Lot, it's at
In the evening, yeah.
So there's something about day and night.
Yes. We'll continue with the connections. Mike?
I still think that this is kind of mirroring the Passover in a lot of ways.
I do too.
And so they also had a quick exit.
True.
They also had to be indoors.
Yes, that is very true. And judgment is coming the next morning. It's so very clearly connected to the Passover. Yeah, that's a good point. So when Abraham offers a morsel of bread and yet provides a feast, some people have said, well, Lot offers a feast but only gives a morsel of bread in the form of a matzah. That doesn't actually say that. It says he prepared a feast for them and matzah. It doesn't say it says he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread. So he does seem to have fed them, and not just unleavened bread. So there's that. Now, God speaks to Abraham and promises him a child, is what happens next in Abraham's story. What happens next in Lot's story is that Lot intercedes to protect his guests. So you put those two things side by each, if you want. I don't know exactly what you would do with that. Abraham is promised a child, and Lot intercedes to protect his guests. Not sure. Angela?
It's out of order, but both of those stories talk about children. And Abraham is going to have a son, and Lot ends up having 2 sons with his daughters. But it's just not in order.
Yeah, that's true. Next in the story, Abraham is brought into God's confidence. It's like, hey, should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, seeing as he's going to become a great nation? And then he tells him, here's what I'm here to do. And it is about this time in the story that Lot is brought into the angel's confidence. We're here to destroy this place. They let him in on what's going on. So there is a revelation of God's will to both Abraham and Lot at this point in the story. So there is that parallel. And then Abraham intercedes for the righteous of the cities, and Lot then attempts to warn his sons-in-law. So there is a bit of intercession going on in both of those instances. So there are some interesting parallels, and I would encourage you to dig a little deeper into that. There might be some spiritual nuggets that can be found there. Some parts that don't seem to line up very well, but as Angela suggested, maybe they're out of order. There does seem to be some backwardsness going on here in some way. It's very confusing. Angela?
Both wives get in trouble.
Both wives.
For disbelief, Sarah for laughing, and Lot's wife, of course.
For what exactly? We'll talk about that in just a moment. What exactly did Lot's wife do? Well, we'll talk about that in a sec. But yeah, there are some interesting parallels here to what's happening with Abraham and God and what's happening with Lot and God. They're not lined up perfectly, and there does seem to be some backwardness, but they are connected in some way. So what evidence do we have that Lot is a righteous person? Well, I think he did try to warn his guests and get them out of trouble. He did try to stand in the gap to say, don't do this wicked thing. He tried to warn others, his sons-in-law, to say, hey man, get out of this place. God's going to destroy it. So are these acts of righteousness?
But didn't he warn the brother-in-law that said something about him doing it like jokingly?
Yes.
Like he was trying to deceive them and trick them into doing something?
Yes,
or
yes.
He wanted them to stay because that's so interesting. And then he ends up leaving without them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then his daughters lay with him.
Right.
It's kind of odd.
It is definitely.
Why is he, I mean, you were saying that they were high ups, and that kind of makes sense, but
possibly. It's one impossible interpretation. There's a lot of confusion going on here, and I think
it's not a very righteous thing to do, though.
No, it doesn't seem that way. Yeah, but I mean, can we see a little bit of Lot's righteousness? I think we can see some.
He's an extremely contaminated character here.
That's a great
so alongside
way.
Utter contamination, he's extremely contaminated, but in that setting, in that pond, he's the righteous one.
That's a great way to look at it. And it's interesting that we discussed this in the same way when we talked about Noah. That the scribes and the elders have said Noah was not a particularly righteous person, but in his day, he shined like a star among the people he was around. And it seems to be the same for Lot. And it's interesting that 2 Peter, when Peter talks about them both, ascribes righteousness to them that we don't clearly see in the text, and says that they were actually doing things and feeling things and behaving in righteous ways that we don't exactly see in the text. But there's some insight there. And there's chaos in both of these situations. The world is about to be completely destroyed in one, and 5 cities are going to be completely destroyed in another. This is a time of great chaos and confusion. And the men who we are seeing as righteous don't seem exactly righteous. Angela?
Maybe the whole thing is there to challenge us on our definition of righteousness, because we get this idea in our head of what a righteous person looks like. And
right.
So maybe this whole thing is there to make us stop and reevaluate what exactly is righteousness.
Yes.
And make us think about it.
Yes, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. What's that?
It's very dangerous too, though.
Yes, it is.
I could flip this around and say, well, I'm living in utter chaos and sin just dripping off of everyone. And for a better part of the day, I'm better than a lot of that stuff. So I'm kind of like, well,
you know what? I think
I'll be all right. I'm just flipping.
You know what? That is actually a good point, Tim. And I think
a lot of people walk around that way.
That is a great point. And I think that this is here as a juxtaposition to teach us that we want to be like Abraham, and yet we find ourselves a lot like Lot. That we are a lot of times stuck in Lot land when we are moving towards becoming like Abraham. And that's why these two are laid side by side for us, so that we can see what is our goal and where are we actually at, and what is the grace of God. Angela.
Because both the offspring mentioned in each of these stories next to each other are in the line of our Redeemer.
Great insight. Yes. You recognize, of course, that through Isaac, this promised son, will come the Messiah, and it is through one of these inbred children, the Moabites, that Ruth comes in and marries the grandmother of, or the grandfather of King David. Both of these seeds will commingle and produce the Messiah, Yeshua.
Because God
Interesting
said he'd
insight.
always keep his seed going.
That's right. But we see Rahab the harlot is also mentioned as being a part of the seed of David, and also a Moabitess, Ruth, and also Isaac. So yeah, this is it's a mixed bag, baby.
Is Moabites not destroyed at some point?
No, when the
Because
children of
Moab
Israel,
means incest or something.
Means of
Moab
my
means
father,
of my
or
father.
from my father.
From father, yeah.
So incest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when the children of Israel, remember, left Egypt and they were going to the promised land, God said, don't mess with the Ammonites.
Yeah.
They're your cousins, and I promised that land to the children of Lot. And when they came to the Ammonites, he said the same thing. Don't mess with those people. Those are your cousins, and I've given that land to the descendants of Lot. So they were not given the land of the Moabites or the Ammonites. Now, the Moabites and the Ammonites would wreak havoc and destruction on the children of Israel later. Just like all of their cousins, they didn't get along. But
Still don't.
yeah, but God had compassion on those people and ascribed to them a certain type of protection just because of their relationship to Lot and Abraham. And you notice that passage at the back end of this section, which was kind of strange. You notice that it says here that when God... in verse 29 it says, thus it came to be when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. It doesn't say God remembered Lot. It says God remembered Abraham and therefore rescued Lot.
He remembered his prayer.
That's a little strange, isn't it? Is it that he remembered that Abraham had actually made intercession for the righteous of the city? Or is it because of some connection that Abraham has that and here's a curious idea, that somehow the righteousness of Abraham is imputed to Lot? What does that remind you of?
No,
What?
no. Like his family.
Jesus.
Oh, okay. Well, where have you ever heard the phrase imputed righteousness?
From the line of David.
That's from Yeshua, the Messiah. It's because of his, that's where our righteousness comes from, is imputed righteousness because of his faithfulness. You know, you've seen that passage in the New Testament that talks about because of our faith in the Messiah. Many translations have kind of, in recent decades, looked at that and said, you know, it doesn't actually say that our salvation comes through our faith in the Messiah. It comes through his faithfulness. Because of his faithfulness, not necessarily our faith in him, but because of his faithfulness we are saved. So, and you can, in his righteousness is imputed to us. You can see maybe just a hint of that. It's just an idea, but can you maybe see just a hint of that somehow the righteousness of Abraham is imputed to Lot? And it seems to say pretty clearly that God remembered Abraham and decided to rescue Lot. How do those two connect?
You see that, I mean, that's a pattern throughout the Torah, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the same thing happened for Solomon,
Right,
right? The same thing happened with Noah's family.
right.
Like, you've got one guy that is really super
Yes,
close
yes.
to God.
And you remember that passage in the prophets where it talks about saving sons and daughters. Do you remember which passage I'm talking about? Where it says, in those days, you know, no one would have been saved except for, you know, if I had left Noah, he would not be able to save himself, but only himself, and no sons and daughters. But behold, when this greater salvation comes, that there is a multitude saved. And I think that we can see that salvation, that promise, that offer of salvation is expanding exponentially in that passage of the prophets. But I just thought it was interesting that it seemed to be saying, you know, he remembered Abraham and decided to save Lot. Those two don't seem to
It's just
connect.
like us, though. We pray for our kids, and we pray for our grandkids and great-grandkids, and on, and even though we die, God answers still. because of the faithfulness and the trusting in God.
Right.
He does save our generations even when we're gone.
And I think that makes a great case for two things that I would point out. A, intercessory prayer is a powerful thing.
Very powerful.
It is.
The prayer of a righteous man avails much.
The prayer of a righteous man avails much. That is correct.
But
So,
what prayer does the Lord hear? And
What's
it
that?
has clean hands and a pure heart.
that's right. And we'll be looking at that.
Intercessor better have clean hands and pure
That's
heart.
right. And we'll be.
Close his ears from hearing the Torah.
That's right. So we'll look at that in the next passage when Abraham goes to visit Abimelech. We're going to talk about pure hands and a pure heart. So when we look at intercessory prayer being powerful, I think that's absolutely true. Also, there's this idea here that the righteousness of one can somehow be passed to another. And that's one of the big problems that the rabbis or Jews traditionally have with Jesus is they talk about, and this is one of the things you'll hear from anti-missionaries. I don't know if any of you listen to Zach Bauer. He had a video out just a couple of weeks ago. It was like somebody was saying, you can't take, someone's not going to die for the sins of another, because it says in the Torah, this man shall die for his sins. It will not be because of, the son cannot be punished because of the sins of the father, and the father, everyone is punished for his own sins, which is a completely different thing, completely out of context. But the whole idea that righteousness from one can be imputed to another, they say that's not anywhere in the Bible, and that can't be true, and that's why we can't accept this Messiah you have called Jesus, whose righteousness is going to be transferred. That is a total lie. That is very much a lie. It's all over in the Torah, and it is also all over in the rabbinic writings.
Yeah,
It's everywhere.
and that's your right.
They totally do believe that, but they'll argue with you about Jesus, saying we can't accept that. No, you absolutely can. It's all over in the Talmud. What's that?
Say that again.
They no, I will say it again. I apologize if it wasn't terribly clear. The rabbis, the problem that they have with Jesus, many Jews' problem with Jesus is one person cannot die for the sins of others. You can't take the righteousness of one person and transfer it to someone else.
What did it on the cross?
Yeah, that's one of our beliefs, that Jesus is the Messiah.
I've heard writings by the rabbis talking about that.
Well, that's the curious thing, is that many anti-missionary rabbis who are coming against Christians, that's saying that is an abomination. You can't have somebody dying for the sin of others. Yeah, but that's a fabrication,
But
because...
didn't he do that there was 3 men, right?
Yeah.
Did he transfer his righteousness to one of the guys? To one of the...
Well, we're just talking about this section where it says that God remembered Abraham and decided to save Lot as a result of his remembering Abraham. So it seems that somehow the salvation of Lot is connected to Abraham. But we can also see that righteousness being transferred is a key part of Christianity through the Messiah. But the rabbis will say that is not ever a part of Judaism. But that is a lie, because that is all over in Judaism. You can see...
What did Moses do?
Moses stood in the gap.
He said, take me instead, and God did not kill them all. I mean, it's
Right. It is in the Torah, and it's all over in the rabbinic writings. They will even go so far as to say that you can pray on the behalf of one of their righteous rabbis of old, like the Vilna Gaon or Moses Maimonides or some righteous Zadik that they call them, that their righteousness can somehow be appealed to cover the sins of others. It's all over in rabbinic writing. So when they say Judaism would not ever accept righteousness being transmuted from one person to another, that's a lie. It's just not being intellectual.
In a more practical sense, those that you're around that are righteous, that affects the way people walk around them.
Right.
Yes, it absolutely does. I totally agree. So I just wanted to bring that out because of this little section here. It just seemed interesting that it was worded that way. So I wanted to kind of bring that out. You know that when Peter talks about that righteous man, he calls him righteous 3 times. It says that righteous man's soul was tormented. It says who was torturing that righteous man's soul? Why was that man's soul being tortured? Who was torturing his soul? The way that Peter words it, it seems to be he's torturing his own soul by being among these people. The way that it's worded. Angela?
That part in my Bible is in parentheses. Does that mean it was added?
It could be, if it's a parenthetical. Well, generally it'd be in italics if it's added, but if it's in parentheticals, that means that it is in some copies of that book, but not in others. So it could be like
it looks like somebody saying, okay, we need to explain this because everybody's freaking out about him being called righteous.
It's possible that is an explanatory note that is in the margins or something of a really old copy of the book of 2 Peter, and later translators didn't know whether it was part of the text or part of a commentary, and they just included it. You can see the same thing with the woman who was being caught in adultery, that there's another parenthetical there, which that just means that it appears in some manuscripts and not in others. Yes, right. So I don't know, but that's a good point. That could be that is actually not in the original text. So it was Lot himself who appears to have been torturing his own soul by hanging out amongst these people. So who was he able to save by being a part of this society and maybe being a preacher of righteousness or something? Was his witness effective?
No.
No. Didn't do him a lick of good. Not a lick. So, this is really a common idea among the naive, I think, and perhaps even foolish among our sheep, that they can hang out with the wolves and save some souls. It's not a good idea. It never does work out very well.
No, but the devil gets them there, doesn't he?
He certainly does.
The thing is, when you're thinking about imputing righteousness to someone else, in Christ's instance, and in Lot's instance, and in Noah's instance, it was still incumbent upon the person receiving the righteousness from the other person that they be requesting it and receiving it.
Yes, yes.
So
somebody who is, yes.
But it's still free will of the person.
Right,
being
right.
talked about.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that what we need to kind of look at is, again, what we were talking about briefly before. Are you walking with these people or are you walking among these people? Lot does not seem to be with them. But can you see, maybe Tim was talking about this previously, does it seem maybe that Lot's influence became corrupted?
Yeah.
That maybe he lost his testimony? You know, I think the evidence that we have in this text that Lot's testimony became contaminated and not especially useful is that when he goes to his sons-in-law and warns them of judgment to come, he seems like he's joking. Now that, to me, says something serious. In your interaction with the people out there in the world, if you suddenly became serious and said, hey, I got to tell you something, would they take you seriously? Or has your behavior among them been in such a way that if you spoke about serious or spiritual things, they might take you as not being serious because of the way you have behaved with them in the past? It kind of seems out of character for you. That's what I'm getting perhaps from this reading here, is when he does broach a spiritual subject with them, trying to warn them of impending judgment, they take it as a joke. Mm-hmm. They don't understand that he's being serious. Perhaps...
They take it as a joke, or say he says it as that?
No, it says that he seemed to them to be joking.
It's the same word laughing as that was
mocking.
Used in 18.
Right.
So there's got to be a connection to Sarah laughing and these guys laughing. I don't know what, but...
They're unbelieving.
It's that same word of...
Sure.
That's his son-in-laws?
Yeah. Mike?
So, I get what you're saying, but I think there's a difference in the message too. So
Okay.
There's people that I work with that I could go and talk with them seriously about something spiritual.
But that wouldn't be would that be out of character for you?
But if I went to those same people and told them that God was gonna send fire down on the building tomorrow, they would all evacuate. And they
Yeah.
laughed.
Yeah. No, I totally understand that. But what I'm saying is, if you went to them and began to speak to them in a spiritual fashion, would that be out of character? Would they think, where's this coming from?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because I think, and I'm not saying it's, any better for me, but maybe that's something we need to look at. What is our interaction with the people around us in the world? If we are just commonly associating with them and talking about, water cooler talk is about that TV show or that ball game or that hot chick, whatever. If we're engaged in common, and you can use the word unholy, common conversation, which has nothing to do with any spirituality, and they wouldn't recognize in us a serious bone to talk about something that's serious and spiritual or something like that. If we suddenly began to talk to them in a spiritual fashion, would they say, where's this coming from? You know what I'm saying? That might be an indication
I agree with you on
that we have become maybe a little bit mixing in a little too much, and we have not stood out just a little
And I
bit.
think that's what he's doing. If he's doing it, not to be malice, he's doing it because he doesn't want them to realize that, hey, he's one of those guys. Because they're all from crazy town.
Yeah,
He's
good.
supposedly different from crazy town. So
Right.
if he's different from crazy town, then
Sure.
you can't go and be lay down the law here and say, hey, some serious stuff's gonna happen there. They're like, and they'll look at him and go, wow, we didn't
Yeah.
do like that.
Yeah, Angela?
That's what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
People, and the end is near, the world's gonna end tomorrow, And that's,
Yeah.
He wasn't like he was trying to talk to them about spiritual things. He
No.
was telling them the world was coming to an end.
That is
And
true.
so
That is
like
true.
Mike said, yeah.
Yeah, no, and there is a difference, but I thought that maybe there was a spiritual lesson here that about how we interact with the people around us. But yes, if you go to your coworkers and say, God's going to rain fire down on the building tomorrow, yeah, they're probably going to look at you like you're joking. But I thought maybe we could extrapolate a spiritual principle and say, how is our interaction characterized? Would it be unusual if we were to bring up spiritual things for them? Not God's going to rain fire down on us.
I would say, it's best to ask questions, and if you can ask questions and get them to open up, I always find a good, well, what do you believe?
Right.
And they will tell you, oh, I don't believe in anything, or,
Sure.
well, why is that? Then if you just start asking questions, they will answer, and you can give them,
Yeah.
a biblical answer, because most of the time people want to know
Sure.
what you believe,
Sure.
and vice versa.
And from the conversations that I have with you, I know that you're the kind of person who is likely to get up in people's business and talk about spiritual things. Whether wanted or not, you're going to bring it up. And that's, that wouldn't be out of character for you. And somebody who knows you, even in an associate just kind of way, would know, yeah, Tammy's one of those people who will talk to you about spiritual things, which is good. It's not out of character for you. But if you normally interact with them on a very low level, very mundane, then suddenly you start talking about these things, it'd be like, where is this coming from? What, did you recently convert or something? So maybe it's just an idea to maybe examine ourselves and see how are we interacting with the people around us. Mike?
Just a couple of things I was thinking about here. So, these aren't just his neighbors, this is his family that he's giving this warning to.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking about, a prophet in his own home.
Yes.
Isn't this the carpenter's son?
Yes.
It's not like Messiah was doing water cooler talk. But
Sure.
yet these people that knew him
They
as
thought
the
they knew him.
carpenter's son,
Right.
Right. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Familiarity breeds contempt. The prophet has no honor amongst his own people. So yeah, that's definitely true. That could be playing into it. Yeah, definitely. I think, we can see, one question that I wanted to ask you guys in regards to, him rebuking me, saying, please, my brothers. Are these guys his brothers? Is he speaking euphemistically?
I think he just says brothers meaning you people.
Well, he calls them his brothers.
Yeah, but
I think he's not. I think in a sense he was trying to identify with them in order to seem like he's being reasonable. I don't know that he's saying these are my brothers, and I don't mean that literally. I mean he's appealing to them in a sense of universal brotherhood or something like that. But, you know, it kind of reeks to me of saying maybe he is a little too connected with these people. Not in the sense of brotherhood, but maybe in a little bit of a sense of brotherhood. I'm not sure. That's verse 7.
7?
Yeah. Yeah, and take my daughters. You know, really strange stuff. But I think, is it right? What does he get for rebuking these people?
Shoved into the wall.
He gets shoved into the wall, and they're about to, you know, beat him up and say, well, you open your mouth against us, now we're going to do worse to you than we were going to do to
He
them.
also got protected.
He did.
If he had handed them over, perhaps he would have been struck blind too.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. But I would say you can, you know, something that's interesting is to read maybe the beginning of the book of Romans. We don't have a lot of time to do that this evening, but take a look at the very first chapter of the book of Romans about what maybe happened to these Sodomites as God gives them over to this open depravity. But I do want to look at Proverbs chapter 9 says, he who reproves a scoffer gets shame for himself, and he who rebukes a wicked one gets himself a wound. Do not reprove a scoffer lest he hate you. Reprove a wise one and he loves you. Give instruction to a wise one and he is wiser still. Teach a righteous one and he increases in learning. That kind of reminds me of Yeshua talking about casting your pearls before swine and giving what is holy to the dogs. Right. So it seems to me that Lot's not having a lot of influence in this place. And when he rebukes them, they become incensed. Is it your job to judge? Look at what the book of 1 Corinthians says. I wrote to you in my letter not to keep company with those who are sexually immoral. I did not certainly mean with those of this world who are sexually impure, or with the greedy for gain, or swindlers, or idolaters, since then you'd have to live outside the world. But I have written to you not to keep company with anyone who is called a brother if he is one who is sexually immoral or greedy for gain or an idolater or a reviler or a drunkard or a swindler. Not even to eat with such a one. For what do we have to do with judging outsiders? You don't judge outsiders. You keep your mouth shut. It has nothing to do with you.
Doesn't that just line right up with what we're talking about him calling him brother though? Because that's what I was thinking. Like when you say something to somebody and you call him. I've got somebody being hostile or something.
Sure.
Try to calm the situation down. Listen, my friend, let's just calm down.
Yes, and I think that's exactly what he's doing. But he's saying, don't do this evil thing. He's judging them right there. Not by calling them brothers, but by calling, don't do this wicked thing. He's judging them right there. What you're about to do is wicked. He calls them out on their sin. So I think the point here is you can't call out people out there on their sin. It's not going to get you anywhere.
Especially if you've chosen to live among them.
Yeah.
And benefit.
Right. Now, should you stand up for righteousness?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
For yourself.
For yourself.
For those around you.
If you want to stand up for it, you want to be consistent.
Yeah. There is a fine line, though. There is a fine line. Yes, Gracie has a good point, and that's a traditional understanding of, are you repenting and you're not doing it again? Well, I'd like it to be that way, but you know what? Do I speak things with my mouth which are not always kind, which may be judgmental of other people? Yes, I do. Do the Jews call it lashon hara, speaking bad? If you ever speak about someone and they are not present, there's a good chance you probably shouldn't have said it. Now, I recognize that is a sin. Do I keep doing it? Yes, I do. Happens all the time. My desire is to not do it.
That's right.
But it keeps happening. Because who can tame the tongue? It's a restless evil and full of deadly poison. That's really hard to do. But yes, I know it's wrong. Yes, I keep fighting against it. But yes, I keep doing it. What does Paul say? Those things in me that I don't want to do, I just keep on doing. So we're fighting against sin. Well, you know what? It's challenging stuff, you guys. It's challenging stuff. So it really reflects on us. Living as we are in a society like we do, just like Lot, we're going to be coming up against this stuff more and more and more. It's going to be coming. We need to move closer and closer to the Lord, and we need to pray for help all the time, because it's going to become more and more challenging.